we want to look at localization. Now, the idea behind localization is that we are able to provision an application in such a way that it targets a specific region in how it presents with things such as the language that your application uses. So, localizing an application is a two-step process. First, you must internationalize your application, which is what allows for localization. Internationalization essentially means we want to remove all hard-coded references or all hard-coded values rather, and replace those with references that will access resources. Once we have done that internationalization step, we can localize for a given region by then providing the resources for that region. Once we have done that, Android can automatically select the proper localized resources based on the device configuration when the application is being run. So we can provide any type of resource, image, strings, layouts, what have you, and then have them be selected if the device that is running your application is in a certain part of the world or is set to a certain language. So let's start by internationalizing our application. Basically, internationalizing means removing all hard-coded values such as strings and instead placing those strings inside of a string resource and then referencing those values. And we're going to be able to do that both in our layout files as well as our activities. So let's start with our layout files. The first thing we're going to do is sort of take note of how this internationalization works, or how we can specify string resources. So under the values folder, there is a file called strings.xml. And by default, you tend to find a string for your app name. So if you ever need to change what your application name is referred to in different areas of the operating system, this is where you can change it. Now, our goal is to essentially add a set of string values for every string that is currently hard-coded in our application. Hard-coding strings is never recommended. In fact, you might notice that whenever we have hard-coded strings in, say, a layout file, we get these errors telling us that the hard-coded text should be removed. So you tend to see things like hard-coded text error messages, and we're asked to fix those. So what we're going to do is fix them, and you can do this in a couple of ways. You could manually add a string item here in the strings.xml file, and then add that reference to your layout file, or you can have Android Studio automatically move your already hard-coded string to the strings resource file and then update the reference for you. So it's up to you sort of what approach you want to take. So let's try the automatic approach, and then we could see how we would do it manually. So we'll start from the top. Maybe we'll take this please sign up text view. And if we can find it in the list, here we have hard-coded text. And on the right, we see that it gives us details about what the problem is. And we are going to right-click on the error and select Show Quick Fixes. And then the option Extract String Resource is the first in the list. If we select that, a dialog pops up. basically asking us to name the entry in the strings XML file. So it's given us some recommendations. The resource name would be please sign up. The resource value would be the text that we currently have as hard-coded. And then it asks where this information should be stored. So it's going to be in the strings.xml. And right now we have values, which is the default, but there's also one called values night. So this was an alternate resource that was generated for us automatically that can be used when your application is in night mode. So we're not going to reference this one. We're going to create our own alternate. So first, let's go through and actually change these things. So for resource name, I personally like to put a prefix for all of my string resources that tell me where the particular string is being used. This is not a law or a rule or even a guideline that I'm necessarily aware of. This is just a personal preference. So in this case, I might say, well, this is from my form. So I'll put the word form in front, please sign up, and I know exactly where this is from. So I hit OK, and you'll notice that the value that you see here in the preview has not changed. It's still saying please sign up. But if I were to look at the text value by, say, either switching to code or scrolling the attributes window, if I find that text view, which will be somewhere in here. Here you can see it. The Android text value is no longer please sign up as I had initially written. Instead, it is now saying @string, the type, /form please sign up, the unique identifier. So this is a reference to strings.xml. And here you can see the new entry that was added. The name of the string entry of the tag is form please sign up. And here is the value between the opening and closing string tags. So I can, again, continue doing this manually, or if I so choose, I could do this, or rather I could keep doing it automatically, or I could do it manually. So a manual entry would be something like name is equal to form password, and I would put password. Then I could, by duplicating that line, let's form confirm password, and then I believe I have one for email. So form email, and finally I had a button. So I'll just say button. I could put sign up button, register button, whatever it is. And this one will say sign up. So those are my values for my form currently. And now I can go to my layout file and I can enter these values directly. So I'll go to design mode so we can see exactly how this would be done. And for, I think I actually missed name. Is that right? Yes, I did. So let's add one for name. Seems useful to have. So I'll just call this name. And that's a string. So back to our layout, we can have, so this was name as an actual value. So even that's not something we even wanted. We wanted this to be a hint. So under hint, we'll put @string form name. And for password, for hint, @string form password. Confirm password, same thing. @string form confirm password. @string form email. Well, spell it correctly. And then for the button, this would be for the text value. We have @string form button, just keeping it simple. So here we see that nothing changes insofar as we still see the same or similar text values that we had before being displayed in our various views. But my layout file no longer has any of those error messages, or at least the warnings relating to hard-coded text values. Clearly we have other warnings. These are things that I can in fact fix. But that's for another time to go through all of these other elements. But right now the text values are fixed. Now, this is my default where I've set these values. Had I done this from the beginning, then my landscape alternate layout would also have had these updates. But right now these are still hard-coded, so I will have to essentially go in and change these values as well. And now I can actually now just do this in code view, so we can see it done in both versions. So this was the hint, and this is name, so it's at string form name. For the password, at string, and what I'll do is just copy the prefix since it's the same for all of them. Password. For our confirm password, it'll be confirm password. For our email, it will be email. And oh, I think I got that wrong. Oh, this was the password, so I think I mistakenly overrode something. That's fine. So let's do that again. Confirm password. Here is email. And then lastly, we have our sign up button. Well, penultimately, we have our sign up button. And then for the text view, finally we have, this was sign up, please sign up. So this could have been something like form title message or something generic. But either way, this is essentially it. So now both our default and our alternate have the correct values, or are in fact using string resources. And one of the benefits here is that we can now change values and have those changes be reflected in both files. So if I decided that instead of having name as the hint here, I would like it to say enter name, then I simply go to the strings file and say enter name. I no longer need to modify two files, and I get the updated value in both. Took a second for the update to happen, but we can see that it was in fact reflected. And that'll be the same everywhere. Now, in addition to doing resources or using string resources in our layouts, we can also use string resources in our code, in our activities. So in the case, for example, here where we're showing a toast message that pops up this text value, right now it's hard-coded, which means that we're not fully internationalized. We have not removed all hard-coded references. So we can do that here, but there is a slight complication because this string value has this variable, this name variable, which was used to show the person's name that signed up. And if that's something we want to keep, then it means we need to add something different or something extra to our string resource. But before we do that, let's look at the simple case where we just want to show this message, thank you for signing up. Then that becomes relatively straightforward. We just take this string value, we go to our string resource file, and we add it as we added pretty much everything else. So in this case, I wouldn't say this is a form, this is more a message. And let's call this message welcome, and it's whatever it is that we want it to be. So message welcome is thank you for signing up. Now back in my layout file, I just need to reference this using the R class. So I can do something like get string, which is being accessed because I have I'm making a call on a context object, which has the ability to access resources. So getString is not just defined in the ether; it's defined essentially on my context class. So I can call getString, and then I pass in the resource, which in this case, instead of the at string, it's r dot string dot message welcome. And now this application will look close to what we had before. The exception is it will not have the person's name. So we'll have to address that. So if we run this application, we hit sign up. Thank you for signing up. It's pulling the string from the string resource file. So that's good. Or so far, so good. Now, if we want to include the name without, say, hard coding it by doing string concatenation, what we will do is something called string formatting. Now, to do string formatting, we essentially are going to add to our string resource something called a format argument. Now, if you've ever used, say, printf in a C program, then this will be something somewhat familiar to you, although it's slightly modified. But at least you'll have this notion of injecting this specific string type inside a larger string, which is then subsequently replaced by the real value that you would like to display. So the format looks like this: %position $, type. Essentially, what we're doing is specifying which argument that is going to be provided later, which numbered argument should show up in this position, and what is the type of the argument. So %1 $type $s basically means the first argument is going to be of type string. The first argument that you pass in is going to be put in this position. You can find the various types online, but it's basically something like S for string, D for integer values, or it should be essentially decimal, C for character. It's various types. Again, if you've done C or done anything like this with C in the printf statement, you'll be familiar. I don't have all the types off the top of my head. So we essentially add this formatting, and then in our activity, when we are calling getString, this specific function will do it for us without much effort. We can simply pass in a second argument, that is the value we want to insert into this placeholder, for want of a better term. So now when we call getString, the string formatting will take place in the background, and this entire call gets replaced by our message with the provided string inserted. So running our application now, we get if I enter Claire and I hit sign up, I get thank you for signing up, Claire. So this is step one, sort of. We've internationalized our application, and we have provided what is, in fact, the default resource. Now, it's an important point here that even though clearly, all of the values you've seen here are English, it's not that my default is English. It's that my default contains English, and that it so happens to. Meaning, Android doesn't care what I put in here. All Android cares is that this strings file is the default, and wherever it sees a particular identifier in another resource or in code, it will grab the value associated with that identifier if no alternates have been provided or if no alternates match the current device configuration. So it so happens that all my default values are English, but it is not that the default is English, and I hope you understand that distinction. What we want to do next is provide a localization. That is, we want to provide essentially a translation to make sure that if a user in another country or another region that speaks a different language, or even in our region that speaks a different language, is using our application and their device is set to that language, then we would like to spare them from having to figure out what all of these English labels mean and instead give them these strings in their own language. So what we're going to do is we are going to create an alternate resource, and in this specific case, an alternate strings resource. And we can do that by essentially extending our resources, going down to values and specifying that we want to create a new values resource file. So this is the old-fashioned way, where I would specify as the file name strings. It must be the exact same name as the file you are essentially providing an alternate for. Again, I don't need to have the XML. But the other way of doing this is, much like last time, is head over to the resource manager. You can find the resource from the tab above. If you don't see what you're looking for, it may also just be in this drop down. We happen to be looking for string. So here is the string value. And when we hit the plus, we'll see two options. We can either create a string resource file or a string value. So in our case, we want a string resource file. From here, we specify strings. And under qualifiers, what we're going to do is specify locale. So locale speaks to language and region, and that's exactly what we want. We want a strings file for a given language and region. So once I hit the double arrow, I'm provided with two options. The first is the language, and the second is the region. So we start with a language. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a language. Let's say I decide on French. So I don't know any French, like not at all. So this is going to be interesting. And after we select the language, we're then presented with a set of regions, countries that speak French. So you can essentially then realize that you can have a different French translation for France as you do for Guinea or Haiti or Madagascar. It's not necessarily going to be a single French translation, but again, with my limited knowledge of French, I'm just going to select any region, which means as long as you specify that you speak French, this is the translation you're going to get. And it's probably better than me trying to get into the nitty-gritty of the specific translations for a given region. But of course, if I had professional translation services, then this is something that I could, of course, do. So when I select OK, I get my new resource file, which is empty, much like when I created an alternate layout. And similar to when I created an alternate layout, I find that the best way to start is to go to your original, essentially grab everything, think of it as a starting point, and place those values inside the alternate resource. Here I now have both of my strings files. One is the default, one is for French. And right now they all have the original English values. So what I need to do is replace these English values with the French translation. So here I have magically provided some French translations for everything except the app name. It's possible that your app name is fixed. If it is that you can translate the name of your app, then by all means. So this is all French. Is it correct? I have no idea. It's always a good idea if you're building an application for the real world to have an actual someone who speaks the language. As a worst case, best case, to have a professional translation service go through and ensure that your translations are correct. This was all automatically generated for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and assume it's correct, or as correct as it needs to be for this example. Now, from here, I essentially have a couple of issues. Well, one issue repeated. And this is something that can happen even if you are not doing a translation. If I try to run this application, it is not compiling. Essentially, there is a problem with my resource. And essentially what's happening is that my strings contain characters that need to be escaped. Specifically, what it needs is for me to escape these single quotes, and I do that by placing a backslash in front of the quotation mark. There are other characters that have special meanings in strings, and if it is your intention to show that character as a part of the string, then it must be escaped. For example, the backslash itself has special meaning, as you can see, because it is used as the escape character. So if we wanted to display a backslash, then we would actually need to escape it with a backslash. Once we've done this, we can now, I believe, compile our application, which has now been provisioned with an alternate string resource. So by default, we are seeing the English values, which again are what are placed as my values in the default strings resource file. But if this user happened to be using the French language, then they would be able to see this form translated to that language. So we're going to try to change the language of this device, and hopefully with my limited, and by limited I mean zero knowledge of French, I'll be able to change it back. So I'm going to go to my device settings. I can do that by just pulling down the notification shade all the way and then hitting the settings icon. I could also simply bring up all of my applications and find settings there. From here, it's somewhere here, but I can actually just search for a language, which I can only do right now because we're in English. So I hit language. I see that I have a few language options. This is under accessibility. That's not the one I want. Speaking to my assistant. That's not the one I want. Language is an input. Seems like what I might want. And then there's another one for text to speech output. That's probably not what I want. So I'll come here. Language and input. And here I see languages. United States English. I'll click on that. And now I can see I have the ability to add a language. So I'm going to hit add. And then it is my hope that I can identify French in this list. Hopefully it's under F. I think it's this. I'm not going to try and pronounce it. So I'm going to go ahead and select French. It wants to know what region. It's all regions by default. That's fine. Oh, these are giving me all the regions. Suggested Canada, France. It insists that I pick a region, so not knowing any of them, I'll just select France. And right now my device is still in English because that's the first language. What I need to do now is drag French to be the first language, and in a moment the entire device will update its configuration to have French as the default language. Now, what that'll do is, in addition to updating the device configuration, it will actually restart a configuration change for devices. That configuration change will force applications that are currently running to restart their activities, allowing them to reload any resources that they had previously used. So if I were to switch back to my application, I see that everything has now been converted to my attempt to provide a translation. So now, when Claire signs in and hits sign up, we get some message that may or may not be French. So now we have a localized version of our application for the French language. And I could, from here, continue to add additional strings.xml files for different languages and different regions, ensuring that as many users as possible or groups of users as possible have access to my application in a language that makes sense to them.